I would like to introduce Kate Hardwick. Kate Hardwick is an accessibility researcher and airport planner, and she has been working over the past couple of years on a research looking forward to 2036, a presentation outlining the findings of a recent study conducted. Well, as I said, Kate knows everything about her research, so I welcome her as soon as she appears on video.
Thanks, Roberto.
Here she is. Hi, Kate. Good afternoon.
Hi. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to be speaking here today. If you could just go to the next slide for me, please. I'm Kate Hardwick. I have a degree in air transport management at Loughborough University, and I'm a graduate airport planner at Jacobs, an engineering firm based in London, in the UK. While I've only been working in aviation for around 12 months, through my degree, I've developed knowledge in accessibility, which has led to my invitation here today. Next slide, please. As part of my final year at university, I carried out research into airport accessibility. I'm sure many of you in this call can remember getting several LinkedIn messages from me asking for your help in this project. Thank you for all of the enthusiasm with which you responded. So my research looked to identify a vision for accessibility services at airports and outline the required actions to achieve the future vision, producing a roadmap for the next 15 years. Next slide, please. The study used a two-stage survey method with 31 industry panelists across 5 different regions globally. The distributions are shown on the screen. So they provided views from 6 key industry groups, which were regulators, disability representatives, accessibility service providers, airline representatives, airport representatives, and airport planners. The panelists informed the development of a baseline vision statement and actions within the study. And they also provided verification for each of the recommendations. So a 70% consensus was needed from the panelists in order for any idea to be put forward in the conclusions. Next slide, please. The first part of the study looked to develop the baseline. So this identified the current characteristics of the service, from which it became apparent that despite the growing awareness of accessibility, many passengers are still traveling with disabilities are experiencing an undignified, worrying, and often painful service. Unfortunately, the study identified mostly negative views about the current accessibility service, and the baseline showed that the approach to assistance service varies greatly around the world, and that while some countries, airports, and airlines are making significant improvements, others are not engaging with the service beyond the legislated minima. So while improvement is being made on an individual basis, globally, the service is failing to provide an equal level of access to all passengers. Next slide, please. Year on year, requests for assistance are growing around 6 times faster than the overall the growth of overall demand. As such, it's necessary for improvements to be made to ensure that infrastructure and operations are able to handle the future demand pressures. Panelists within the study suggested that without improvements to accessibility, delays will accumulate, costs will increase, and service levels within airports and across airlines will fall. The expected increase in demand was just one of 3 key pressure points that was identified by the study. So the study identified 2 other push factors, including growing societal pressure, which is created by both increased empowerment from passengers and by society, who are now much less accepting of inequality, and COVID-19. So while we know that COVID has decimated the aviation industry, it has actually been seen as a potential positive for accessibility. Panelists identified that airports are going to be looking to build back better, and panelists therefore see accessibility becoming a growing priority within the aviation industry. Next slide, please. So having identified the baseline and the change push factors, the next part of the study was to develop a vision statement. This is the goal for accessibility, which the industry should be working towards, looking towards 2036. The 31 panelists identified 5 key aims for moving forward. So universal standardization, looking to have the same service across the globe for passengers. So there's consistency from origin to destination. This will allow passengers to access any destination they wish without the worry of traveling through one or any of the airports along their journey. Customizable service. As we've discussed, every passenger is different and therefore their needs will differ. What one passenger needs, another won't, and passengers should be given the opportunity to tailor the service that they want. Service preparedness. So demand for the service is growing, and as such, airports and airlines need to look ahead. Resiliency needs to be built into the system to ensure that as a greater proportion of passengers need assistance, the infrastructure and resources are available to manage that growth. And then cross-industry communication. So aviation needs to look outside of itself. We need to work with other transport industries and improve accessibility door to door. And finally, increase data awareness. We need to make sure that we know the passenger levels requiring assistance, what the breakdown of needs are, and ensuring that there's data available to forecast demand and effectively manage our resources during demand peaks. Please. Next slide, please. Okay. So the question is, how do we get from our current service position to the agreed vision statement? The study identified 54 actions within 6 key areas: regulation, communication and collaboration, education and prioritization, technology, operations and procedures, and infrastructure. Overall, the actions developed by the study align with the social model of disability, which identifies social, procedural, and infrastructural barriers where action is needed. As such, the actions are not all about infrastructure and new facilities, and in fact, many of them look at the way that we communicate, collaborate, and manage our systems. Next slide, please. One of the most commonly discussed actions was the need for universal regulation. Within the roadmap, there are 13 actions related to regulations. However, many of these are built around the idea that we need an international standard to provide passengers with that consistent service. Panelists suggested that the standard regulation should mirror a structure used across European airports, which many of them considered to be the most passenger-focused of current regulations. The first requirement is therefore to adopt a global standard, and from there we need to increase pressure on airports and airlines to show year-on-year improvement through things like accessibility ranking and stricter enforcement. Regulation should act as a benchmark, with regulators providing incentives for airports to go above the minima. Next slide, please. Almost all of the study panelists identified a need for increased communication and collaboration within the industry. It's key that individual parties begin sharing knowledge and information with each other, looking past the issue of competitive advantage and financing, and instead placing the passengers and their experience at the center of the system. The study suggested that national forums be developed, where airport representatives could bring and share best practice, innovative ideas, and current successes. This could then be developed on an international basis by an institute or governing body. The same forum structure could be set up for airlines and service providers, thus creating the necessary cross-industry communication. Next slide, please. It's important that aviation continues to look outside of itself, both learning from and sharing with other industries. The passenger experience needs to be viewed as door-to-door, and as such, accessibility of surface access also needs to be considered. Public transport sectors such as rail, bus, and dynamic ride sharing like Uber and Lyft should be a part of the accessibility conversation. Airports need to look to share best practices with them, and as such, they should form a part of airport working groups and national accessibility forums. By increasing the accessibility of these transport modes, airports will enable the elderly and passengers with disabilities to move away from private modes of transport and towards more sustainable public transportation. Next slide, please. We all know technology is now a major part of the passenger experience, providing opportunities for passengers that weren't possible 5 or 10 years ago. Within the field of accessibility, technology has the potential to improve passenger connectivity and increase self-mobilization. Panelists indicated that the wider application of current innovations like Wheel and IRA would move us closer to the vision statement. There was significant agreement on the need for an Uber-style app, which would enable passengers to customize their assistance while at the airport, allowing them to ask for assistance when they need it, but not when they don't, giving them greater control and autonomy of the airport experience. Panelists also identified the need for data collection and sharing to be carried out globally, with the development of centralized collaborative databases, which allow for passenger journeys to be followed from booking through to journey end by all relevant parties. Next slide, please. As we know, change costs money. The need to increase investment into accessibility was one of the most commonly discussed actions within the entire study. Panelists were keen to point out that there is a potential financial gain for any airports or airlines that take investment into accessibility seriously. It's currently estimated that within the UK alone, £42 million is lost to the transport industry a month because elderly and disabled passengers do not feel comfortable using the current transport systems. Therefore, those that accept the responsibility of providing an accessible environment will be able to capture a larger share of the market. And with 20% of the population having some form of disability and an expected continued growth in our aging population, a share of this market will develop into a large financial return. This makes for a significant business case for airports and airlines to improve accessibility and make the necessary financial investments to the system now so that they can reap the benefits going forward. By engaging with groups that deal with accessibility issues, airports will gain a clearer understanding of demand and market potential of this passenger group. And the engagement will also allow them to gain insights into how to make air travel more welcoming, in turn providing them with that financial return that we just discussed. Next slide, please. Final task in the study was for panelists to place the proposed actions on a timeline. What surprised and excited me was that panelists identified all of the actions within the short and medium term. This means that we could see the vision statement of universal standardization, customizable service, service preparedness, cross-industry communication, and increased data awareness achieved within the next 10 years. However, panelists were keen to identify that this is if, and only if, the industry overcomes the barriers surrounding finance and industry attitudes. Without individuals, businesses, and regulators in the aviation industry having the motivation and desire to make changes, the vision for global inclusion will not be possible, and inclusive universal accessibility will not be achieved in 10 years, 15 years, or beyond that. As has been discussed, there are actions that can be taken to reach each of the 5 key areas within the vision statement. And while this presentation has touched on just a few, it has highlighted that there are options out there for moving us towards that end goal. While I was researching the topic of accessibility, I realized that at the moment we are making improvement, but it's being done mostly on an individual basis. And this study has shown that while we haven't been working as a collective, we do seem to have a collective goal. And now that it's been put to paper within this vision statement, we should be able to focus on it together. It will be exciting to see how we begin to work together and open up discussions globally to push the aviation industry towards this vision of accessibility as a collective. Next slide, please. Thank you all for listening. Before I take any questions, I'd just like to say thank you to anyone listening that did take part in this study.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kate. That was absolutely insightful, and it's amazing. I know there are many people I can see that are on the call today that were a part of your study, and it's incredible to see what you were able to put together. It's just incredible. I did notice that within your presentation, you didn't touch much on actions related to operations and procedures and infrastructure areas. What are some of the actions that you put forward within these?
So within infrastructure, it was things that was very closely linked with the regulations. So it's things about we need to standardize the number of lifts that are within airports, the number of changing spaces, sensory rooms, things like that. You know, it should be that it's demarked that airports have every X number of gates, one of these provisions for people. And then from an operational point of view, one of the big ones was moving baggage check-in outside of the airport, looking at doing that remotely. I know with COVID, that's going to be quite a big thing as well, because we're looking to find more space for passengers to social distance, and for passengers with mobility issues and other disabilities, moving these bags to the airport is quite a challenge. So if we can move that away from the airport, then that's one less thing that they have to deal with.
Great. And what are the next steps from this study to help the industry put the actions into practice? And what barriers did you identify that would require more research?
So from a barriers point of view, there was several key things like the terminology that we're using. The terminology PRM is quite exclusive. So I tried to look at alternatives, but it wasn't really within the scope of the project. So there's definitely space to continue with that. Same with SSR codes. It was identified by quite a lot of panelists that these aren't quite fit for purpose, but when I investigated it with everybody involved, nobody wanted to get rid of them completely, but nobody really knew what the next thing to do with them was. They all recognized change was needed, but not what. So there's definitely more research needed in that one. And for this study, I think the next stage is to get the industry involved, see what actions people would be willing to take up now, what actions we might need to develop a little bit further. I am pushing to get this published, so it will be available for people to read. And it would be great to open up discussions about how everybody can use the actions to actually move us forward and towards a better accessibility for everybody.
Fantastic. Roberto, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Actually, I have. We received a last-minute question for Kate from Mary Doyle. Could the regulators map this vision statement to the UN SDG, in your opinion?
So I think the paper is quite high level, so it doesn't necessarily, none of the actions are this is how we do it. They're all about what we need to do. So regulators could take it and then develop it wherever they want, mapping it to whatever they need, and it could be applied to any of the current regulations as well. So it's not a set in structure, like formed roadmap. It's more of a, here's our starting point, let's start the discussion.
Thank you, Kate.